Hello, my name is Michael, and I am a recovering optimist. I say that because I no longer am, nor want to be, the ray of sunshine I was freshman year bouncing along Martin's way. You see, freshman year, I thought the key to a good life was a positive attitude. But then, unexpectedly, the terrible events we see in the news around destruction and violence and sickness became gut-wrenchingly personal. And I lost my bounce, and I became pessimistic. And people who were around at the time of these events told me that it was normal to be pessimistic, but that's why I see it as my responsibility to set the record straight. While it might be natural to accept bad news with pessimism, that kind of attitude will never solve anything. What we need is optimism. But first, we have to redefine what it means to be optimistic. That's because in the US, we are inundated with bad news. Last year, 11 of the top 13 news stories focused on death. They covered tragedies such as school shootings, vehicle crashes, terrorist attacks, and more, yet somehow, 80% of Americans classify as optimists. This seems counterintuitive, almost as if we're callous or something, but really, it's the reverse. We're overwhelmed. You see, at a psychological level, when people are inundated with bad news over and over, these events become normal, natural, and acceptable. Martin Seligman, former president of the American Psychological Association, calls this learned helplessness. It's this phenomenon that, rather than getting angry and trying to solve our problems, people are content to turn to feel-good entertainment like BuzzFeed and Netflix. Rather than trying to solve the problems they see in the news, young adults spend on average 5 hours a day watching TV and surfing the internet, and that number only goes up with age. This kind of learned helplessness transforms into willful ignorance. And that transforms into blind optimism, which is all just synonymous with being disillusioned, which is exactly what I was for 20 years. We need to redefine optimism as what Carol Dweck, an acclaimed researcher in human behavior, calls a growth mindset. You see, unlike a pessimist who might see a challenge as outside of their scope or responsibility, people with a growth mindset recognize the magnitude of a problem without feeling overwhelmed. They know that their cognitive and physical abilities can improve through hard work and practice. This is similar to the idea of grit, which was coined in Angela Duckworth's TED Talk that says, the most successful people are the ones who are relentlessly incremental towards their goals, despite the challenge and despite the path ahead. This is the kind of attitude that I have seen firsthand starts to solve problems at the global, community, and individual level. Here's some examples. Last spring, I was in Nepal during the biggest earthquake of a century. 8,000 people died like that. And hundreds of thousands were displaced, including my own homestay family, who spent the night after the quake sleeping on concrete. Now, the 17 students in my program knew that we could never solve this issue. But we decided to try. Through our efforts, we raised enough funding for 13,000 meals to go to earthquake relief. And a pessimist might focus on all of the people still in dire need. And as a first year, I would have assumed that charities had it all under control in the first place. But as real optimists, we knew that we had not even made a dent in the problem, not even a dent. But 13,000 people did not go hungry one night because of our effort, and that is something. Let's take this down a level and talk about optimism at the community scale. School shootings are a national concern, and we've even had some scares at Hamilton in recent years. But my sophomore year, this concern became a reality. I remember watching the live news feed as students were escorted from my high school with their hands over their heads because 2 were already dead, and it was unclear if the shooter was still at large. Now, after this event, my community had a decision to make: to be pessimistic, which meant to ostracize the shooter's family, disillusioned and grateful that only 2 students lost their lives and then move on, or optimistic and start the long process of forgiveness and trying to improve mental health and safety on campus one step at a time. I'm grateful to say that my community chose optimism, and while still a painful memory, school shootings do not feel like a constant threat anymore. Let's take this down one more level. Why is optimism even necessary for individuals? My sophomore summer, my mom, and my only parent, was unexpectedly diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. And in dealing with that news, two statistics constantly race through my mind. 4 to 5 people with stage 4 cancer die within a couple years. And Harvard Medical School says that a positive attitude leads to better recovery than a negative one. Now, a pessimist would focus on that 4 to 5 and might give up, and a disillusioned person would enjoy the leisure and privilege of imagining that positivity would fix everything. But my mom and I couldn't afford to be either. I would call her every day, trying to keep her spirits up and savoring our time together, just in case. Fortunately, my mom's still with us, but we might not have made it this far if we hadn't faced an often overwhelming issue with hope. You see, there's no time for pessimism because that drives learned helplessness and inaction. And there's also not time for being disillusioned because pretending that all is right in the world leads us to a relaxing day without taking any responsibility for our power to help. Real, intentional optimism is acting relentlessly incremental despite the challenge, despite the path ahead, and that is the attitude that I have seen helps people feed thousands of survivors. Let go of hatred and continue to live with cancer. Yet these are all such small groups. Imagine if we all did this as Hamilton, or as a community, or as a state, a country, maybe even a world. If we all took one step to help, despite our location, despite our resources, if we all just said, it might be hard, but I'll try to do something, then we would change the world. That is optimism, and that's what we need.